conference room able to see us?
Yes.
We are.
Okay, you should be good.
All right, well, welcome to the May 6th meeting of the Thurston Regional Planning Council. I'll call this meeting to order. And we're going to start with introductions. And how this is going to work is I will read the name of the jurisdiction off of the list. And I would ask you, if you are the voting member from that jurisdiction, to introduce yourself. If you're attending as a staff or an alternate, then we'll ask Mark to introduce staff from the various places, including TRPC at the end of introductions. So we'll start with Olympia.
Clark Hillman, present.
Hi, Clark. How about Lacey?
Malcolm Miller, present.
Hi, Malcolm. And Tumwater?
Eileen Swarthout, present.
Hi, Eileen. How about Thurston County? Do we have Commissioner Edwards yet? Maybe later.
I know that, Chair, I know that he'll be attending.
Oh, he will. Okay. Well, we'll circle back and see.
Okay.
How about Rainier?
Dennis McVeigh, present.
Hi, Dennis. And how about the pretty good city of Tenino?
Oh, no, how about the great city of Tenino, John O'Callahan?
Hi, John. I've been waiting for using that all month long. Okay. How about Yelm?
Yelm's here.
Hello, Joe. How about Bucota? Sorry.
5 feet west of the bright shining center of the known universe. Yes, Bucota is here. My camera, for some reason, decided to go up on me. So all you can see is my background. And if you look over to the right-hand side, see a little bright spot? That's us.
Oh, hi, Steve. How about Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation? Okay, and Nisqually Indian Tribe? How about North Thurston Public Schools?
Gretchen Maliska.
Hi, Gretchen. And Tumwater School District?
Mel Murray.
Hi, Mel. And I'm here representing the Olympia School District. This is Hillary. How about Intercity Transit?
This is Debbie Sullivan. I'm here.
Hi, Debbie. And Lot Clean Water Alliance? All right, we'll come back to them.
I might be able to say something. I know that Cynthia Pratt is on that. I'm sorry, Cynthia Pratt. Carolyn Cox.
We knew what you meant.
I know that she's a representative of that, and I think I usually see her here for that, but she is actually in Florida. Her mother died, so.
Oh, okay. Well, we will look forward to seeing her at the next meeting. How about Port of Olympia?
Bob Iannello here for Port of Olympia.
Hi, Bob.
Hello.
And how about PUD of Thurston County? Oh, did I see Chris? Okay, we'll come back to that one. And Thurston Conservation District. Check that in. Lacey Fire District. I saw Rick.
Hello, Rick Killing from Lacey Fire District 3.
Hi, Rick. You're there in person. Nice to see you from afar. Puget Sound Regional Council. How about the Evergreen State College?
Scott Morgan with the Evergreen State College.
Hi, Scott. That's a beautiful picture. Is that in Multnomah Falls?
Yes.
Oh. And Thurston EDC. Or Timberland Regional Library. I didn't see Cheryl. Okay. So just checking in, do we have anyone who I missed the first time around? Thurston County, Chehalis Reservation, Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation, sorry. Nisqually and Indian Tribe, PUD. All right, well, we'll welcome
Chair,
them.
I do see that our representative from the PUD, Linda Oosterman, has joined.
Oh, okay. Linda, would you like to introduce yourself? I don't see you on my thing. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm Linda Osterman.
Linda.
From representing the PUD. I'm a commissioner there.
Lovely. Thank you for joining us, Linda. Okay. So we will get right to the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, John O'Callaghan.
Second, Dennis McVeigh.
It's been moved and seconded. We approve the agenda for today. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, everyone in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. The agenda is approved. That takes us to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved, John O'Callaghan.
And is there a second?
Second, Malcolm Miller.
Great. It's been moved and seconded. We approve the consent calendar. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. I just realized I forgot to let Mark introduce staff. So I'm going to pause before we go to public comment. And Mark, can you please introduce yourself and staff and anyone else attending? My apologies.
No problem. Good morning. I'm Mark Daly. I'm the Executive Director at Thurston Regional Planning Council. And also from TRPC here in the room, we have
Bina Tabbitt, Deputy Director.
Karen,
Karen Parkhurst, staff.
Dorinda,
Dorinda Merrill, staff.
and we've got Berlina Lucas online, and we've got Dave Reed, Amy Hatch-Winica, and I believe that's it. From Intercity Transit, we've got Ann Freeman Manzanares, Jason Hanner, and Jessica Gould. From Olympia, we have Joyce Phillips. From and now I see Eric Phillips also from Intercity Transit. From Olympia, we have Joyce Phillips. From Thurston County, we have Matt Unzelman. From Tumwater, we have Mary Heather Ames. I believe I've covered it, Chair.
Great. Are there any other staff present who we missed or alternate members? All right, great. Thank you. Again, apologies for that mess up. That takes us to public comment, and it's my understanding we do not have anyone signed up for public comment. Is that the case?
That is correct.
Great. So that brings us to our first item of business, which is the transit safety performance measure targets. And this is coming to us for first review, so no action required. And I just want to pause and just do a quick overview of our protocols for discussion and questions as Vina gets set up. So this is our first hybrid meeting, and we are going to always give council members the opportunity to ask questions. We ask, unless the presenter would prefer to have questions midway, to ask questions only at the end. And what we'll do is at the end, I will look for raised hands, the raised hand feature in Zoom. I will also connect with Mark and see if there's anyone in the room who has raised their hand. We're going to sort of hobble through this a little bit this first time, so thank you for your patience. I will try to run an equitable queue, and what that means is that I'm going to prioritize getting as many individual members of council time to share their thoughts and questions during the council meeting. So if you've raised your hand and there's someone else who's raised their hand who has not spoken before in the meeting, I might skip you and go to them and then come back to you. But the goal is to get full participation. So that's how it's going to work. And Vina is going to take us away on this first presentation, and then we'll pause and see if there are any questions at the end. Thanks, Vina.
Here, just very quickly before Vina starts, just to note, from Thurston Conservation District, Helen Wheatley has now joined us in person. as
Oh,
well.
thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate it. Hi, Helen. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Bina Tabbitt, here, the Deputy Director here at TRPC. Andy and Jason Hanner from Intercity Transit will also be on hand to answer any of your questions on this agenda item, which is about federal transit safety performance measures. So this agenda item is one of the things that we bring to you annually, and it is part of your responsibilities as a metropolitan planning organization, one of the hats we wear at TRPC. So Berlina, next slide, please. Okay, so it's a federal requirement. Like I said, it's responsibility as part of being a metropolitan planning organization. We have looked at adopting performance measures across all types of things, and this one happens to be related to transit safety. So how this came about, in 2020, Intercity Transit developed something called a Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. A safety plan which encompasses all of their performance areas, and they set performance measures in there. And annually within that, they set targets to meet those performance measures. And so this is, I think, our third time looking at their targets. They set them recently, their management team approved them. And our role as an FPO is to adopt them and then just tell the federal government we're in sync with Intercity Transit. It's fairly easy here because Intercity Transit is our primary transit provider. And so it's not like we have 5 or 6 transit providers and we have to sort of work on averaging them out. Next slide, please, Berlina. So the timeline, like I said, they have adopted.
Can I interrupt for a second? I can barely hear the presentation.
Okay, is that better?
A little bit. It's very quiet. Do you have a microphone?
We will next time.
Okay.
They're up on the ceiling, so I'll try my best. Okay, so this is your chance for your first review to ask questions. The actual targets are in the staff report, and then next month we'll have it on your consent calendar. So with that, it's a very short agenda item. If there's any questions, Jason would be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you very much, Berlina, or Vina, sorry. And are there any questions? I'm looking for raised hands in the Zoom. And Mark, you'll let me know if anyone has raised their hand in the room, correct?
Yes, Rick Kelly has a question, Chair.
Great, go ahead, Rick.
So as we go through the presentations today, I'm reminded of the potential for our area to become a transportation management area. Did I get that acronym correct?
You did, yes.
So my question is, how will these proposals be impacted if, as we anticipate, developing into a TMA or transportation management area?
Yeah, great question. The performance measures will stay the same. We will still have this role. It encompasses both smaller, what we are now, metropolitan planning area, and a TMA. So.
Okay, so the proposals won't be modified because of the additional population. Perhaps in future years, they might be.
Yes, if we ever reached a population of over 1 million, then there are other ones, but there is no difference, as far as I know, between the two.
Thank you.
Clark Gilman has a question, Chair.
Well, it's not so much a question, but if you looked at the report, I mean, first, good news that there was 0 fatalities. But it's striking to me that between fixed route and paratransit, we're at about 3 million miles of travel and another 1.5 million in Vanpool. And we have 2 injuries on fixed route buses, 1 on a paratransit ride. I just think that's pretty remarkable given the number of people moved and the number of miles traveled.
Agreed. Thanks for pointing that out, Clark. Are there any other hands? I don't see any in the room, and I don't see any in the Zoom either. So this is a first reading, and it will come back on consent calendar or for second reading, Mark?
That's correct.
Okay, great.
Oh, we do have one more question, Chair. Helen Wheatley.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi, Helen.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just wondering if you break it out at all into urban versus rural, because when I was looking at the environmental equity maps, one of the things that they look at is traffic patterns. And it looked like there are differences between rural and urban accident rates and causes. So is that something that you considered breaking out?
That's a question for Jason.
Hi, good morning. Jason Hanner, Chief Safety Officer for Intercity Transit. Yeah, no, unfortunately, we don't break it out that way. The FTA only wants us to report as a whole right now. Our safety committee actually goes a little deeper and looks into, different routes that these accidents are happening on, where they're located, all kinds of different things we look at as a safety committee. But as far as for this report, no, we do not.
May I ask one other clarification?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hillary, I'm curious whether rural transit is included in this study, or if this is just intercity transit.
This is just intercity transit. Rural transit is not technically a transit agency. It's
Like a social service provider or
Yes.
something? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
That is a really good clarification. Thank you, Clark. And thank you, Helen and Jason. Are there any other questions in the room or questions online? I don't see any hands raised online. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see this again for second reading. That takes us.
Chair, I'm gonna ask that council consider a minor amendment to the agenda so that Vina can get logged into her computer so that her sound's a little better.
Yes.
And so if council would entertain me doing my executive director's report now, that'll give Vina a little bit of time to get logged in so that folks online can have a better presentation experience for her next presentation.
Great. Is there a motion to amend the agenda to move Mark's?
Move approval to accept the friendly amendment to the agenda.
Okay, Berlina, did you get that?
John O'Callahan.
Yeah, I got John.
Okay, and is there a second?
Second, Eileen Swartz-Tumwater.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Eileen. It's been moved and seconded. We amend the agenda to move the executive director's report to item number
It would be 7.
7. Sorry, I was on the wrong page. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great, thank you very much, Mark. Way to work on the fly. So now we're
Yeah, it's our first hybrid meeting, can you tell?
Hey, that's what happens. All right, so Mark, you're going to go ahead and do your executive director's report.
I am. So a couple of things. Folks, some of you may have already received an invitation to participate in our household travel survey. We've talked to council about this in the past before this started. This is an incredibly important piece of information for us. We've hired a contractor to do this because this is a statistically significant sample, and so they're doing it in a few tranches of sending out to people in the county so that it's truly a random representative sample. And I said within the county, but it also is our surrounding areas as well, because we want to make sure that we're capturing some of that movement in and out of the county as well. And so I just wanted to give you an update. We're still in the middle of this, but so far things are going really, really well. We're a little bit ahead of where we projected being at this point in terms of people participating in the survey, which is great. We're still recruiting people to participate, so you may still receive a invitation in the mail, and encourage people to consider doing it because it'll provide you with a good insight into what it is we're collecting. Because like I said, this helps inform our transportation model, our transportation demand model update that we'll be doing over the next couple of years. This is kind of that foundational piece for that. So incredibly important. We're a little high in terms of participation with folks between the age of 65 and 84. And we're a little low on participation from people outside of the Thurston region. Not entirely surprising, because they get a letter from Thurston Regional Planning Council asking them to do this. So, but our consultant is providing us with really good updates on that so that we can try and course correct in terms of reaching some of the populations that we're not reaching, to make sure that we truly have that representative, statistically significant sample size, but it's going really, really well so far. I also want to mention at the last meeting, or maybe meeting before, council heard about some of the transitions going on at TRPC and approved the creation of the finance and HR manager position. That we recruited internally for that, and Tyson Justice has been selected as our finance and HR manager, and he started in that role on May 1st. And so the next part of this transition is Tyson will be leading, along with assistance from Vina, our recruitment for the transportation manager position, the other position that council approved at either the last meeting or the meeting before. And we're going to be doing that recruitment within the next month or so, starting that. And that'll be internal and external. So that one's a little different. Lastly, I want to make sure folks know that we have a online public meeting for the Martin Way Corridor Project coming up this Thursday. It's May 12th. It's completely online from 5:30 to 7 a.m. Yeah, it's just like a TPB meeting from 5:30 to 7 p.m. That public meeting for the Martin Way project. So that is a great opportunity to get an update on that project and also see what folks in the community are thinking about the work.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Is there any promotion or is there anything going to be pushed out for that? So for public awareness?
I should know that offhand, and I don't think that I have our project manager on this call.
I'd be happy to share it.
So I know the answer is yes, but I don't know what that promotion is. I apologize for that.
Maybe that can be sent out to the council. We can put it out through our.
Will do, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you, Malcolm. Are you?
And that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Yes, I see a hand. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, over there in Zoom land. Mark, I'm not real good at reading between the lines. So I'm hearing this, getting the invites to the household travel survey. I had a TPB member call me and say, I got one. Did you get one? Were they sent specifically to all the board members?
They were not,
Okay.
and great question, and I'm glad you asked, because no, not everyone will get this invitation. This is a random sample of people in the community. And so, so some will get it, some won't. Thank you.
I got one.
Actually, Mark, I have a question about that
Sure.
too. So if I received one, I have to fill it out for myself, correct? I couldn't like let my teenager fill it out, since I know that's also an area where we often don't have a lot of participation.
I'm going to defer that question to Vina.
I believe it's a household travel survey, so you
Okay.
fill it out for your household, or you could have your teenager be the primary person. But my household is doing it, and we both signed up for the app, and we both have to fill out surveys every day.
I
Okay.
got it. I have some input on that. I got it as well, and I downloaded the app. They give you an app that you can download that automatically tracks you. And they ask you to fill out, all the cars and users in your household. But this is probably, maybe we're a good like mini sample. I downloaded the app. I'm doing it. It's great. It even tracks my daily dog walks, and it knows that I'm walking my dog. It asks you, it gets a little onerous if you really fill it out, because it asks you about every single trip. And it's a really good app. But it also, so they ask you about your household, and then they ask you to bounce the information over to the other household members. And everybody gets the inducement of a $20 gift card. But that's not sufficient for my 20-somethings or my busy spouse. So, so as a mini sample, 1 out of 4 is filling it out. Even though it's pretty easy once you download the app. So,
Okay, great. Thank you, Helen. That's really good to hear. So
Yeah.
maybe like encouraging our families who might have gotten it in the school district to have their kids do it too.
yeah.
Okay, great. So Vina, are we ready?
I've got one more question in the room.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Curious about the group that you're using, because to be able to get, it's difficult to get a sampling, because we have specific like age groups that will typically fill out surveys then, and how do you reach that? So this is going to be real interesting to see. I'd be curious to who you're using and how successful it is. And and also I can think about the climate thing that, trying to reach, there it has opportunity for a lot of different surveys.
Yeah, so the firm that we're using, and Vina can help me on the name, but they're not just, a sample. They've got specific expertise in this area of tracking transportation. They developed this app and that sort of thing to help this. And so there are certainly probably less expensive ways to get that statistically significant sample size. Yet this firm is very talented in helping with this specific sort of exercise, including that making sure it's a random statistically significant, and they've got a lot of tools to help make it easier for people to participate. And the name of the firm is
RSG.
Thank you. Did someone else have something? Yes.
Yeah, as far as, one of the things I've done, because I'm old, is surveys. And this type of survey, because it's not just a one and done, this is probably the easiest way to get it done. I don't know how expensive it is, but this is probably the easiest way to get it done. Not trying to say anything, bad or anything. It's just that knowing what I know, this is the easiest way to do it.
Agreed.
I thought you were my age.
I don't know, I think I'm older than you.
Wiser.
Also,
More experience.
One of the things, since Mark brought it up earlier, and I already talked to Karen about this, we never accepted the resignations of Vina and Karen. And Karen said that if we don't, that we'd probably have to take, fight her husband over this. With all everybody here, I think we could take them,
I'm not sure.
I'm gonna pretend that wasn't a question to me, Chair.
No. Okay. Vina, are you all set up and ready to go?
I am, Chair.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for being flexible. We're going to get back on the agenda to the outreach compensation policy and procedures. This is also a first review, so we have time at the end for some questions and discussion, although I kind of feel like we got a little bit of that discussion during that last session. And I will hand it off to you, Vina, and keep an eye out for questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for accommodating me coming and getting my microphone on so you can all hear me this time. So this agenda item is having a review of a new policy that we're creating as an agency. We have talked a little bit about compensating for outreach, and we are compensating for outreach through the household travel survey. But it's come up time and time again, so we wanted an agency policy in place. So the policy applies to compensating committee boards members as well as individuals participating in outreach activities. So it's an all-encompassing policy. So for the reoccurring events as well as the one-offs like the household travel survey. To receive compensation, if you're part of a committee, the policy says that they can that you are only eligible if you're not compensated by your employer for attending the committee meeting. In other words, staff who are compensated by their employee for sitting on many of our committees would not be eligible for this compensation. We're not going to double compensate, and as well, elected officials will not be eligible. So this is really for members of the general public that are participating on our boards and committees. So why are we having this policy? Why are we considering compensation? Well, the intent is to increase participation in our outreach activities and select committees, especially for areas where it's typically hard to get people to participate. We just talked a little bit about the household travel survey and trying to get certain demographics participate very well in our surveys or volunteer for things they have more time. Other demographics, it's harder to capture them, so a small incentive might help with that. And then for the policy and procedures. It's good for consistency when we're doing these activities and part of our audit controls. So the policy says that compensation will be offered if it's deemed necessary for the outcome. So we're not suggesting that we would give compensation for every outreach activity we do by any means. That would be well beyond our budget. And then we also need to make sure the funding source allows for compensation. For instance, many federal and state funding sources do not allow for compensation of this type. They don't allow for gift cards or anything like that. Those of you that were on the board last year might remember that the compensation for the household travel survey, the gift cards we talked about, came out of our agency work program budget, not the federal funds that were funding this, because the federal funds could not fund the compensation, the gift cards. And then the procedures, how we are going to go about this, our executive director, Mark Daly, will give approval for each of these activities. It won't be left up to staff, of course. And the compensation levels must be communicated clearly before the outreach activity occurs. So it's not after the fact we decide to compensate. If those of you that looked at the house or started participating in the household travel survey, it clearly said this, you will receive a gift card, or you could waive the gift card, that sort of thing, before they took it. Some nuts and bolts. For reoccurring compensation, such as board committee meetings, our money runs through Thurston County, and so they will reimburse the participants by check. And the participants will have to fill out a form, and that's mainly the form, and all of that ensures that we're going to meet our IRS requirements. The income would be taxable if it reaches a level of above 600 per person per year. One-time outreach, though, for something like a household travel survey or something like that, could be compensated by gift cards, and like our household travel survey is. And we just have a good method of documenting that, how they flow through, and that they are actually given out to the recipient. How we determine the rates. The rates are determined through project scoping of what would be appropriate for the household survey. For instance, our consultants suggested rates that really work to bring people in. And in that case, they said, if you don't do compensation, you're going to spend more in the mailings, and it's actually going to be more cost effective to offer gift cards than to keep sending out postcards and trying to get people to take it. And we take that seriously. We're about the bottom line. We're not about, we wouldn't spend money frivolously. We really are trying to look at what outcome we're trying to get. And then the rate structure would be based on looking at 2 or 3 comparable rates, depending on what we're talking about in the activity. Okay, so that is the policy. This is your chance for review. We'll probably have some minor wording things, just clarifying what focus groups and committees are as our staff look through it. But the essence is what will be brought to you for your adoption next month.
Great. Thank you very much, Vina. This is super exciting. I'm looking for any hands. I'm going to go first to Mark and see if there's anyone in the in-person meeting who.
Yes, Chair. Dennis McVeigh has a question.
Hi, Dennis. Go ahead.
I'm looking for a clarification, page 2, item 4. And the section says total compensation may exceed $600 participant calendar year.
Yes.
Is that open-ended, or is that supposed to be may not exceed?
No, that level was about the IRS and understanding the implications of it. It does exceed it, that it would be taxable income. We are saying it's open-ended. We might have a committee say that meets 11 times a year and meets for 2 hours. So the compensation would be, let's say $100 a meeting. So it might go a bit above that. But Mark would be the person who would make a judgment about whether that was appropriate or not.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions in the room, Chair.
No other questions. All right, I'm looking online. I don't see any questions.
Clark Gilman has a question.
Oh, hi, Clark. Sorry. Go ahead.
So one reaction I have is thinking about back in the day when the kid who was the version of free and reduced lunch had to go and wash the dishes with the lunch lady. and the stigma that puts. And there's a big difference we debated quite a bit in Olympia before we added this stipend for boards and commissions, about the difference between having people request and demonstrate need versus offering it to everybody and having people be allowed to decline the payment. And so I see it says each member requesting compensation. And I just want to say, I think that's one obstacle if the objective is greater equity, is asking people to be singled out and fill out a need form. I need childcare or whatever. So it's just something we wrestled with.
May I
Thank you.
comment?
Yeah, or I'm
So
happy.
then, oh, go ahead, Vina.
Oh, we actually are doing the latter in the form. It's the wording in the policy might be a little misleading, but we are offering it and then they can opt out, and we're not asking for them to provide income or anything like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Vina. And good question, Clark. That is very true. And allowing people to opt out is a great way for people to, for us to not stigmatize people. So thank you. Any other questions? All right, great. So we'll see this for second reading, right?
Correct.
You will.
Okay, great. That brings us to the call for projects update, which is the set aside funding caps and public process. This is Vina, Karen, and Paul. Take it away. Stay with us, Vina.
Yes. And Paul is excused. He is on vacation today, but Karen and I are here to answer your questions. So I'm going to share this presentation. And so we had a request to go through the call for projects from the beginning, since we had so many new council members. So some of this might be a repeat for some of you, but it might be new for others. So please bear with me. And then there will be some new content towards the end of the presentation. So we have been working on updating what we call our call for projects. One of our roles as a metropolitan planning organization is to program out federal money for projects, transportation projects throughout the region to our partners throughout the region and non-traditional partners for things like sidewalks or road repairs or planning studies, or just a wide variety of projects. And we are trying to make some changes to the process. So let me go into that. So why are we doing the update? One of the things we're trying to do is make a more direct tie to performance goals and targets. We've adopted a lot of plans in the last decade or so, and we want to make sure we're using this small pot of money to move forward our regional goals. We also want to create a competitive process that's very clear and transparent, that our partners will know how their projects will score as they submit them. And then the third piece is increasingly important, and I'll talk a little bit about that this month and much more next month, but we want to continue to our region to position ourselves to meet something called our obligation targets. It's a target we receive from Washington State Department of Transportation each year to get a certain amount of money under contract, essentially moving. And if we do that, then there is a potential to receive extra money. And we received $1.5 million last year because we did really well with that. And this year we are looking at a potential of receiving much more than that. So to me, that's a very, very important piece of this puzzle that we're putting together. So when I'm talking about the call for projects update, I'm specifically talking about two federal programs that are programmed out by TRPC. One is called the Surface Transportation Block Grant, and that is our most flexible source of funding. But the only caveat is construction projects are limited to major roads. It's something called a functional class. And then the other one is called the Surface Transportation Block Grant Set Aside. And the federal government had said, let's set aside, and for many, many years, let's set aside a certain amount, certain percent of that funding for smaller projects that typically are related to multimodal facilities. So they can go sidewalks for school routes and things like that. They're not related to the class of the road. And with the new Federal Infrastructure Act, both of these pots have increased, but the STBG grants have increased, maybe we're thinking 10, 20%, but the Surface transportation block grant set aside, it seems like it's almost doubled from what we're seeing. It's a smaller pot, but it's really significant. So that has been great news in the last year. So to program, and then we do have a third pot of money, the congestion relief funds, the CMAQ funds. They have that pot has a very specific set of criteria about reducing particulate matter that we can't really work around that, and specific. It's very different. So that's not in this call for projects update. Okay, so the general concept of how we're going to program out money and select projects. The first thing is certain projects are eligible. Those are called our project priorities. They come into 6 categories: planning projects, safety projects, efficiency projects, projects that are looking at the maintenance on roads, resiliency, and active transportation. These are the types of projects we have programmed out for, funded for many, many years. There's no real changes there. There's just changes in how we're describing them and talking about them. But really, these are the types of projects that we've been looking for and been putting money on throughout the years. Then we'll evaluate those projects with something called regional priorities. And this is how it ties to those performance goals. We've identified 4 regional priorities. The first is efficient use of federal funding. The second is about land use, meeting our land use goals. The third is about meeting our climate reduction goal, greenhouse gas reduction goals. And the fourth is about equity. I've reviewed those 2 things, but I will go over them again in a little more detail. And then finally, the third thing we're going to talk about is set asides and funding caps. And that'll be the new content that we haven't talked about yet. So project priorities. So planning projects are things that, planning projects that are very specific, that they develop project lists. They say, okay, we're doing one on Martin Way corridor, for instance, where they're looking at what sort of improvements will improve that corridor. And at the end of the project, they'll have a clear idea of the next steps. They could also support regional coordination. They could provide data like the household travel survey to support planning, things like that.
Vina, I have a question.
Yeah.
For the federal set aside funds, the STBG funds, how would a city access those? You know, like let's say, for example, you had a project that you wanted to put some sidewalks near a school that doesn't have any sidewalks. I know Lacey has a few of those, and I know for sure that Yelm has at least one of those elementary schools that just don't have any sidewalks for kids to walk safely. They have more like a goat trail or something, you know, a little risky for, you know, first graders. I guess I could probably ask this offline, but is there a process that we need to go through to see if we can access some of those funds?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways. One is through the state program. They have a Safe Routes to School funding program that is out of the same big general pot of money, but it's run through the state, and that's specifically for what you're talking about. And then that would also be eligible under this call for projects. So your transportation staff could put in that project for this fall's call for projects.
Thank you.
Okay, so
hey, I just want to pause and think that's a great question, Malcolm. Obviously, I have that question too as a school board director, but can we pause and make sure that we hold questions to the end just because we're already a little behind on the schedule. So I want to make sure Vina gets all the way through her presentation.
And I can hurry up because a lot of this is a review, but I'll try to.
No need to hurry up. I just want to make sure that we don't derail the presentation.
Okay. So for safety, we have safety targets. We talked about the transit safety performance targets, and we also have those for roads and non-motorized travel. So projects that help support safety targets. Most of our members have safety plans and they have projects identified in them. Efficiency is projects that support meeting our adopted level of service standards, or decrease vehicle miles traveled, or support travel demand management, things like that. So things that make use of our existing system and make it more efficient. A roundabout, for instance, might be in there. Maintenance is about keeping our streets and our bridges and our facilities in a state of good repair. For pavement, we have a best first pavement maintenance approach where we try to do overlays and things like that before the pavement gets into poor condition because it's much more costly to tear it up and redo it. And obviously there are some projects that still need to be done in that, but the approach is to try to do that best first approach. We also need to maintain our transit system, and you'll see projects come forward for replacing buses, that sort of thing, as well as bridge repair and replace bridge repair. Resiliency are projects that promote system resiliency. We have a planning project that's proposed to look at system resiliency, look at areas where there's flooding or might be susceptible to landslides. And of course, every winter we're reminded of why those projects might be important as portions of the county are flooded, and then projects to counterbalance that. And then finally, last but not least, is active transportation, things like the walking routes to school, which would also be safety, or any other bicycle and pedestrian type of projects. Or for instance, Intercity Transit has a school education program where they encourage students to walk to school. So a nice, large, wide variety of projects. When we talk about our STPG funds being very flexible, they really are the most flexible pot of funding that we have across the country, where they can fund a wide variety of projects. That's great. It did make the call for projects a little more complex to think about, because we want to make sure criteria fits all the type of projects. How do you compare all these types of projects I talked about? It's not like you're comparing all sidewalk projects. These are just a wide variety of projects. So those regional priorities, how we will assign points. As I mentioned, we have 4 categories. We did do a transportation priority survey and ask folks in our community what they thought about those criteria. And we had very strong support. 98% of folks felt like it was somewhat or very important to have criteria about the efficient use of federal funding. And, 89%, our lowest percent was for the greenhouse gas reduction. That's very strong support in our region. It's not mild support, it's very strong support for all 4 topic areas. So efficient use of federal funding. This is an acknowledgement that this federal funding is not easy to spend. Those of you that have been on this board for a while and have received projects for your jurisdictions know it adds money to have federal funding on your project. It's and there's a lot of paperwork. There's just a lot of rules. For instance, Lacey received some funding to put in electric vehicle charging stations, and it turned out that some of the stations they couldn't buy under the Buy America Act, which meant they had to be manufactured in America. And so they had to do a lot of work to figure that out. So some projects are just a better fit for this funding than others. And so this criteria is looking at that. How do we be the most efficient use of this federal funding? So in general, we used the experience of our technical advisory committee, and the criteria were a base of funding levels. For some projects, like a planning project, it doesn't matter if it's lower cost or higher cost. There's not much extra requirements, or very little, to go with federal funding, and we're used, for our agency at least, we're used to handling that money. For others, like a construction project, you really want to make sure it's above a certain threshold to make it worthwhile to do. The second criteria was our land use criteria. We did a big visioning project about, I don't know, 10 years ago. It seems like it was that asked the community, how do we want Thurston County to look, feel, and function in 2035? And we really looked at the land use in our county as in different areas. We took a look at the North County urban centers and corridors, the South County communities, the neighborhoods that surround those core centers and corridors, and then our rural lands. And one of the primary goals that came out of the Sustainable Thurston Project was to locate 72% of our urban housing, so within the growth areas, the urban growth areas, within a half mile of an urban center, an urban corridor, or a neighborhood center. When our forecast team looked at that goal and projected out last year when they were working on the update of the forecast, they projected that we were going to fall short of that trend. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it's very difficult to locate new, specifically neighborhood centers. We have those in our plans, but the logistics around getting those to locate are tough. And our plan was counting on that. There's people in areas that if you put a neighborhood center, all of a sudden people would have access to goods and services. So the idea here is if we start to invest and remove some of those barriers, perhaps we could change that needle. And so if you look at the green line, the goal is 72%. That's the target. And then the teal line is our trajectory. So we're just trying to bridge the gap between those two. So the idea with this is that we would have project types to support the land use goals. These are a wide variety of projects, such as safety projects or intersection improvement projects, transit projects, efficiency projects like coordinating signal timing, that sort of thing, and maintenance. And also based on where they are. And if they were within certain areas, within those core areas, our urban corridors and centers, they'd receive a little more points than ones in our neighborhood centers or a little bit further away, as opposed to ones on the fringe. And that's our map for that. I will say we just had a great technical advisory committee meeting yesterday and talked about the nuances of this map. I would say this is a draft map, and we are still working out some details of the specific, how the dots get put on there. It really is a combination of land use plans and what's on the ground today. So we probably, you might see a few changes on here, but we are working that through with our partners. But you'll see, for instance, a core area. And last month we talked about, or maybe 2 months ago, the Smart Corridors project and what we're doing to support transit in some of these major corridors. Those are these corridors here, this darker orange. And those are the types of investments we're talking about. Then next is our greenhouse gas reduction targets. We have set a target as a region to be 85% below 2015 levels for our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And to meet those targets, we've suggested giving points to projects, a different range of points. So more points for a project where greenhouse gas reduction is a primary purpose of the project, and so on and so forth. And just there's a list of projects in the attachment that relate to that. And then finally is equity. We talked about that most recently. One of the ways we measured equity was procedural equity, of talking to our community and asking which projects are your priority, and asking that specifically for all populations as well as underserved groups. And it turned out there wasn't much of a difference. The same priorities popped up in very much all categories. And they were these ones that I've clicked here. So conduct planning studies, make intersections safer, make crossings safer, make bus stops more convenient and safe, adding sidewalks to street crossings, and increase road maintenance. So these types of projects, and then we also want to integrate social equity in that, looking at specific project benefits and burdens. And so that would be evaluated project by project. The project sponsors would write a narrative saying, and these are the reasons we think this project is meeting specific equity goals. For instance, if we're talking about looking at different walking route to school projects, a school that had a higher percentage of free and reduced lunch might receive extra equity points than one that was in a more affluent area. And that would be our point system. So 1 point if it made that top 5 list, and then another if it had a demonstrable benefit, but negative if it had an impact. For instance, if the project precluded active transportation or something like that. Okay, so here's the new content. Set-asides, funding caps, and match requirements. And I'm going to explain what our thinking here. But before I do that, well, I'll talk about set-asides first, but I do want to caveat that some of this is very preliminary thinking, and to just talking to our TAC, we might be refining that as we move forward. But as far as set-asides go, we've been talking about, should we pull some money off the top as a set-aside? We have done that in the past. Some examples are the Rural Community Support Program. The Rural Community Support Program has existed for many, many years in various shapes and forms. But basically it's a partnership with the county to take some federal funds and in turn provide local funds to some of the communities that really are not equipped to deal with federal funds, specifically Rainier, Tenino, Bucota, and our 2 tribal partners. And they can use these local funds for smaller projects. And last year we set aside $6,000 in federal funds to fund 2 years worth of projects. And the county has been a fantastic partner on that, managing the program. And I believe the first of those projects will be worked on this year. And they have expressed a willingness to continue with this program. There are other types of set-asides we've done in the past. Some of you might remember something called the Bridging the Gap project, which was about taking money aside to complete the Chehalis Western Trail, right in that area where Olympia and Lacey merge on near Martin Way and Slater Kinney. There used to be a gap there where the folks would have to come down, cross, get under I-5 and then go back up. And now there's overpasses through that whole area for a seamless route. And it was a great collaborative project that money that was set aside from our STBG grant funds leveraged federal funds and really resulted in a huge project being done that everyone could celebrate regionally. Or we could do a set aside for specific project priority area like maintenance or active transportation. You all might say, you know, this call for project should just focus on sidewalks and active transportation, that sort of thing. One of the things we are looking at this year is we have a lot of uncertainty in new and existing federal programs, the new rules around them, and those are still being sorted out. We know, for instance, that we're going to be receiving money specifically for climate reduction programs. And we know there's some changes for our STBG set aside, the TAP funds for the, and there's also uncertainty in funding levels, and there's also new geographic requirements. So things are really in flux right now. So our staff recommendation is to continue with the Rural Community Support Program. It's a really great program, but not really look at other set asides for this next call for projects. Hold that thought for the next call and see how things play out this time. I'm not asking for a decision this meeting. I'm just talking through our thinking as staff as we move forward. Okay, then we talked a lot about doing funding caps, and the reason for funding caps would be to ensure that the region isn't, there's a couple of reasons. One is to ensure we're not dependent on one large project to meet our annual obligation target. One of the things that causes me the most consternation and stress in my position is whether or not we're going to hit our targets each year. Because there's so much riding on that in terms of extra money coming to the region and that's or possible sanctions. And it is much easier to manage that if one project slips, if we have other projects that can step in and fill the gap. So having all our eggs in one basket in one project is really not ideal. And then we also don't want one jurisdiction or one partner to receive all the funding in one call for project cycle. We want to spread the projects throughout the region. I do want to talk a little bit about the geographic breakdown and the funding levels. This is something we just received information for maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, just part of the staff report being due. And I got to admit, we are still digesting it. So we're working with our local partners on possible implications, specifically to our rural areas and our county partner. And we're just thinking about how this will all play in. So I'm going to ask for your patience to hold. We're still brainstorming on how all that might work through. But right now, what we know is our geographic breakdown is more complicated than it was in the past. We have 3 areas. We have urban medium, urban small, and rural. We also know that's going to change in the fall when the census releases it. If we become a transportation management area, this pink will be changed to urban large. That may not change, and the boundaries will change somewhat because there's new census numbers and they're changing the way that they draw the boundaries. So we are working on this call for projects with the information we have today, but we're doing a call for projects for funding that we'll have in the future, and we know things are going to change. So so we're just trying to digest all of this and figure out the implications. So what we think we have, and again, this is subject to change because we're projecting out what we think now for 25, 26, and 27, part of 25, 26, and 27, we think we'll have around a little over 9 million in STBG funds and a little over 2 million in STBG. And it's broken out into these 3 pots plus a flexible fund. And that does give us, for instance, for the urban small and the rural, for the set aside, that does somewhat limit the size of the projects because that's all the funding we'll have available. And so we use that to look at funding caps. So what we're proposing right now is to have a $2 million per phase funding cap for urban medium, and that's so that we don't have all our eggs in one basket, and $3 million per applicant. For the set-asides, it would be $1 million per applicant and no more than $3 million combined. For urban small, that would be a smaller pot, just because there's less funding available. So 1 million per applicant, 250,000 per applicant for the set-asides, and no more than 1 million per applicant combined. And then rural, same, smaller, because we just have less money. We also would encourage partners to submit joint applications. We're proposing 1 joint application with other traditional partners. We may up that. And that's just an area of, if you feel like you want to encourage joint applications, we may want to take that number and up it. And then sometimes our partners put in applications on behalf of non-traditional partners, and we're suggesting that those will not count towards their limit. For instance, it's often a city will sponsor a school district project, and that's because only certain jurisdictions have the authority to sponsor the projects, so they have to sponsor them on behalf of non-traditional partners. Only certain, I think only Lacey, Olympia, Thurston County, and Tumwater have the authority to do construction projects, and then we have authority to do planning projects. And then, so sometimes the Department of Transportation will step in and sponsor a project on behalf of our smaller jurisdictions, or the city and county will step in and help. And then we just ask that they prioritize the projects, and that we're very flexible in the type of, that the staff will kind of say, well, this one could go in this pot and this one can go in this pot, as we sort of work out how they could be funded. Okay, the next topic area is match requirements. This is big news. So we also heard this year that DOT is going to allow us to waive the local match requirements on our projects. They used to ask for a 13.5% match, and it was often difficult to meet. And they're saying you can waive it, which is great news. You can't retroactively, if a project's already got federal funding on, the match requirement stays, but anything in the future. So we've talked about this at our Transportation Advisory Committee. Or Technical Advisory Committee, we don't see any downsides to waiving the match requirement. Honestly, it just means that the local money can be used more flexibly on other projects. It just gives us way more flexibility. So our recommendation is to do what WashDOT is offering and waive the local match requirement as we move forward. Another component I want to talk about is something called a contingency list. This was not in the staff report. This came up actually after the staff report was drafted, but it looks like we will have the opportunity, and I'll be coming back next month, to put forward a updated contingency list for increased federal funding. And it just reinforces, you never know what opportunities are there throughout the year. So you all will be making the decision on what projects to fund. Literally a month later, we may receive more funding. So this contingency list is increasingly important to have. And it really is about having a list of projects that we can get under contract in short order, sometimes just months to go. And so we're going to do a little bit more thinking about how to do the call for projects and incorporate building that contingency list. So it's a robust list, lots of projects, so that when the time comes when that money is dangled in front of us, we have the projects ready to put forward to get funding. And it's really, for this, it's really about, it's opportunistic funding. It's really about whether the project is ready to get under contract and ready to accept the money. And that is harder than it sounds. Okay, so we did have a timeline laid out in the staff report that meant going to public comment. I am going to say we're going to shift this probably by a month to give a little bit more time to digest all the new information we've got in the last few weeks and work it through with our technical advisory committee. So right now we're probably looking at asking you to review it in July and then approve it in the fall. And so with that, I will take questions and stop sharing.
Thank you, Bina. I am gonna look and see if we have questions online. I see one. So, Mark, do you have anyone in the room who has not asked a question yet, who has their hand up? Otherwise, I'm gonna go to our first timers in the Zoom.
So far, we have John O'Callahan, who I believe has asked a
That's fine.
question.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to Joe first then. Go ahead, Joe. And then Matt, you're up next.
Thank you. I was just wondering what determines the size of a jurisdiction. I noticed there was a rural small, or excuse me, rural small and medium. I thought I don't know that.
So that's a census thing. That's not anything we have control over, and it is based on some formula they use across the country that looks at the density of each census block and the population, and it's quite complicated. Quite frankly, we can't even apply it and figure out how we're going to fall. So that's the information we just received, and it will be changing with the new census.
Okay, and which jurisdictions fall under? I'm mainly the cities I'm curious on.
Fall under, well, Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater are in urban medium, and then Yelm is in urban small, along with the Grand Mound area.
So Tenino and Rainier,
they're in rural, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I believe it's something like hitting 5,000 in a certain area for what Yelm has, and then 50,000 is the next level.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe and Bina. Matt, go ahead. And then John in the room, you're up next.
Excuse me. Good morning, Council. I am filling in for Commissioner Edwards. He was having a tough time getting access to the meeting this morning. So he called and passed on a few comments he wanted me to share. The first, in regards to STBG funding, the first comment would be that the county does support the rural community support program. It's important to us to support our rural partners. The second comment was that the staff report stated that TRPC staff had briefed policymakers regarding the set-asides. He was unaware that he had been briefed previously. And then he also wanted to pass along some comments regarding the ranking criteria that's being used. The ranking criteria is going to benefit the cities and intercity transit as it currently is proposed much more than the county. And the goal was for this to be an equitable process. And staff has done some analysis, and traditionally in the past, the county has received around 45% of the STBG funding. With the proposed criteria, based upon some analysis the county has done, is that even though the county has 49% of the population, 66% of the centerline road miles, we're only going to receive 12% of the STBG funding. And so that's not sustainable to the county, or it's not equitable to the county, and the county won't be able to support that process. Thank you.
Vina, did you want to address any of the questions, or do we want to just move to John?
Yeah, no, so Matt has shared these comments with us, and we had a good discussion about that at our technical advisory committee. And that's one of the reasons we're taking a little more time to digest what we've learned. And we're going to have a workshop to really look through how the ranking and see the implications. And then basically we put our problem solving hats on, and we're just trying to think about this now that we've had this information. I will say that once we saw the actual funding levels and the geographic distributions, it's been a little bit of a surprise to all of us, and has become real. So that these are the things that we're chewing over and we'll bring back to you next month.
And I guess one thing I'd add to that is that this breakup of that urban medium, urban, small, rural, this is the first time they've had this breakdown. It used to just be urban, rural. And so this truly it is new information, a new way that the feds are looking at it. Therefore, we've got to look at it again and make sure it does what we intended it to do.
Great. Thank you, Mark. John, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, this might take a little bit. I've been here a long, long time. One of the things that we all know is that anything that says federal is real easy to get and extremely difficult to use. I know a couple of years ago, I had to turn money back in because we just couldn't afford to use it from the federal side. One of the new things that has come up over the last year is, well, actually 2 years, I believe, is that if you do not use money that you have been allotted because you couldn't get your project off the ground, it will go to somebody else. And we were a benefit of $1.5 million. Is that number correct?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not too far off with that then. Since this is a new pot of money, can we look at that money, knowing that it may not come every year, but every now and then, and use that money on the 6-year street plans that jurisdictions like mine, Bucota, Rainier, Young, we always have a 6-year street plan, and for 20 years, our street plan looks exactly the same. I think we've had one project that we've been able to take off of there. And since it's actually monies that were unexpected, would that take that federal stink off of that money to make it easier to use for those jurisdictions? $1.5 million for South County jurisdictions couldn't go a very long way. And if we're allowed to sit down like we do with CDBG money and decide, okay, among ourselves, if we have this money, who gets what? Or sometimes we just give, like Rainier got a boatload of money from us several years ago to take care of their downtown area. And since then, the other jurisdictions have been taking some of that CDBG money, getting more of it than the other jurisdiction. And then it's somebody else's turn, so on and so forth. A lot can be done along those type of lines. I do believe if we can find a way to take those funds that somebody else cannot use because they messed up someplace. And I think this is just going to be a short-term thing because people are going to start to figure out how to use that funds. But $1.5 million could have helped South County a whole lot with sidewalks, streets, so on. You know, the things that we're supposed to be getting fixed. Has that come into anybody's thought process? Or is it because I'm from New York, I think that way?
No, actually, that is one of the things we talked about yesterday of how can we set ourselves up to use that money if it comes more effectively? How do we sort of pre-plan for that? Do we set a maintenance program up that we can pour money into at short order, that sort of thing? And so these are all the things that we're brainstorming right now. And you all have the best staff. And so I know we're going to find some solutions now that we know. The issue is a lot of this has just been happening so fast that we're just being reactive, and now we want to be a little more proactive for this extra money that potentially can come.
And the reason that I asked that is because in South jurisdictions, it's a whole lot easier to get a job spike than it is in this side of the county. So using the 6-year street plan, we've got lots of projects throughout South County that we could have started within a month's period of time if we know that we have that money coming. And the reason that we can is because we can use our staff as in kind. And these guys have been patching roads and sidewalks. They know exactly what needs to be done and how to do it now. So they've got the expertise to get those projects planned. Tenino, for example, we've been using Gibson Olson for our engineers since I became council member way back in '96. So we've got everything in place. We just don't have the money. I'm done.
Can I ask a clarifying question there? Just, but the money that becomes available though is federal money.
Yeah, that's why I asked earlier, is there some way to take the stink of that off?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Mark, I think the solution would be we'd have to have a program that we could federalize and then flip it, but
Yep, like, so something akin to the rural community support program.
Something, yeah.
Okay.
You know, for
Thank
Lacey
you.
and Tumwater, that's not a whole lot of money, but for jurisdictions in South County, that's a lot of good work we could use. Okay.
Yeah, great
I'm really done
ideas.
this time.
Okay. I was just going to ask if there's like, if take the stink off the federal money, if there's a technical term for that.
Defederalize.
Yeah.
Defederalize. I'm sure they would love to hear that. All right.
They don't like that New York terminology.
You keep saying New York, John, but I'm pretty sure you're from the great city of Tenino, right? Did I get it
No,
right?
I'm actually from New York, New York.
I know, but at this point, aren't you
But I
from
represent the
Tenino?
great city. of
Yeah.
Tenino.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I have a quick question, but I want to see if there's any others in the room before we go to break.
None in the room, Chair.
Okay. So mine is kind of a weird question. I was thinking a lot about like what makes things efficient and like what are the needs for through like a school district lens. So we know that we could actually reduce school busing and single vehicles driving if we were able to get more students to take transit, right? And one of the biggest barriers for that among many of the families that we talk to is concern about not knowing how to do it. So my question is, could some sort of a program that staffed buses with docents during school commute hours qualify for funding here? Or would does it have to only be like infrastructure?
it does not only have to be infrastructure. Intercity Transit has their walk and roll program where they have folks.
Yeah,
come
this
into the
is
school.
different. This would be like this. We're talking about like middle school and high school students, like having someone ride, because we actually talked about this in our district. Could we pay paraeducators to ride the bus during school commute hours and be there as a resource? So my question is more like not the education thing, but just to like staff the bus with the anticipation students would be on the bus and would need support.
I don't know. And, but I do know who knows the answer and I can shoot an email to them and get an
Okay.
answer for you.
Yeah, because that in my mind, that would sort of fall under both the efficiency, so reducing school busing. We know we have a school bus driver shortage, but also reducing single vehicle car trips, and also it's the active transportation piece. So just trying to think outside the box. Any other questions in the room? I don't see any online. Okay, great. We are scheduled to take a break, and I would like to honor that wonderful tradition that JW gifted to us. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, which means that we'll come back at 9:53 and we'll resume with the agenda item number 10, the salmon habitat recovery report. So we'll see you at 9:53.
You.
we have everybody back yet? Looks like maybe in the boardroom. I think we have Amy. I see Amy.
It's going out officially. I just.
We're getting started again and I've unmuted in the room here.
Okay, great. And I see Amy is with us. Hi, Amy.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Are you, let me know when you're ready for me to share my screen.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. I think we've kind of got everybody back in. So I think we're, Mark, are we ready to go?
We are good to go, yes.
Okay, go ahead, Amy. This is the presentation or update on the Salmon Hat Recovery Lead Entity from Amy Hatch-Winnica. Go ahead, and we're going to hold questions till the end if that works for you, Amy.
It does, that's perfect.
Great.
Thank you. And we're just going to continue our conversation about projects just in another realm. So thank you and good morning again. My name's Amy Hatch-Winnica and I coordinate the shoots, the RIA 13 Salmon Habitat Recovery Lead Entity, and I work here at Thurston Regional Planning Council. I am not able to forward my screen or my, there we go. Because of course there are technical difficulties. Well, there should be a map. A bad in your mind's eye, a map, because the geography of the Deschutes lead entity includes the freshwater or streams that drain into Henderson, Bud, and Eastern Elk inlets, and the entirety of the Deschutes main stem and the tributaries. Lead entities were created in 1999 when Puget Sound Chinook were listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. We were codified with the Salmon Recovery Act under RCW 7785. And generally when a species is listed, federal law requires that a recovery plan is written, which designates critical habitat, projects, and overall criteria for delisting the species. Generally, the recovery plan is written by the federal government and handed down to the local states and local governments for implementation. In Washington state, the legislature recognized the need for locally driven and supported actions that are derived from science. So they created the lead entities to gather their communities to create a strategic approach to salmon recovery. There are currently 25, soon to be 26 lead entities in Washington state. The lead entity work group locally is comprised of a technical and a citizens committee that meet collaboratively. Our membership includes the Squaxin Island Tribe, local nonprofits, the cities of Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater, Thurston County, the Conservation District, state agencies, and of course, local landowners. The work group uses science as the foundation, and then it layers community and cultural values to determine priority geographies to focus projects necessary to restore and protect salmon habitat. Salmon recovery actions and planning that come from the local community result in better decisions, better projects, and a more involved community. Investing in this local decision-making process has created a strongly supported framework of projects that increases the pace of recovery. Trust is the foundation of this framework. It generally takes between 5 and 15 years to engage a landowner to support a project just to begin the quest for funding. This rapport built locally results in shovel-ready projects seeking only funding to succeed. Our freshwater rivers and streams in these watersheds don't support a native population of Chinook, but we do have many small pocket estuaries and embayments. Essentially, South Sound is the nursery for Chinook salmon from Central and South Sound that come down to Central and North Sound that come to South Sound to rear and grow. They find places to hide from predators. They find plenty of food to eat and safe places to rest. This approach to salmon habitat recovery for the work group has established begins with conservation as its foundation. We know that it's much less expensive to preserve a key habitat before it's been degraded than to try to restore one that's lost its function later. The work group has a project list that identifies projects necessary to restore and protect salmon habitat. We break this down into smaller actionable chunks for funding consideration. For the Washington State Legislature, we share one list that demonstrates projects ready for funding in the next 2 years. Essentially, these projects just funding to move them forward. We also share a longer term 4-year list that gives them an idea of what we are working on in the next 2 biennia to give them a glimpse of not just current, but also future need. I want to share some details about scope and scale of the projects that the lead entity work group has purview over. In odd numbered years, the work group has approximately $170,000 to allocate. In even years, we have about $850,000 to allocate. And just for perspective, Washington State receives $18 million for salmon recovery from the federal government annually. That $18 million is allocated for projects throughout the entire state. Large projects, such as this one pictured here at the Deschutes River Estuary, are captured in our recovery project list and in our recovery plan, and they are supported by the work group, but they're far beyond the scope of a project that could be funded by the lead entity process. Likely that a project of that scope and scale would be funded directly by appropriation or by a budget line item. I'd like now to transition to a recent initiative to update the freshwater priorities and create also this initiative created several implementation targets to measure progress towards recovery. This work integrates the most current studies and the knowledge of the freshwater with the practical knowledge of those walking and fishing in the streams. It folds in community and cultural considerations and generated this really cool interactive tool that anyone can use to identify the highest priority actions and areas. In your staff report, there's a link and you can go in and click on any of these watersheds and it will demonstrate what the conservation and restoration needs are for these watersheds, climate change impacts. It's similar and complements a tool that the Squaxin Island Tribe and the lead entity developed for the nearshore environment. The work group decided to focus in on 3 implementation targets to measure progress towards. They are large woody debris, freshwater riparian buffer width, and fish passage. So in this work, the work group established short and long-term targets. For large woody debris, they decided that 75 to 80% of priority reaches have a functional amount of wood in the system by 2032 and 2050, respectively. These wood structures slow the full flow of water, giving fish a place to rest during high flow events. And they also oxygenate the water by mixing, similar to what a bubbler does in a fish tank. They also hold the stream bank in place to slow erosion, and they provide stream bugs for the fish to eat. A current example of how this target is being implemented on the landscape is this project, the Upper Deschutes Design Portfolio. It focuses on the upper 10 miles of the main stem Deschutes and its tributaries. And the intent of this project is to garner landowner support to install wood structures at intervals along the river and to revegetate the riverbank. The project will create numerous design documents. Each one of them will be a separate project that can be implemented in the future when funding is secure. Matching funds play a key role in every project as a required element and the reality given the limited resources through the lead entity process. The second target established sets a desired buffered width for riparian cover. As with all of these targets, they represent an ideal for salmon recovery in the watershed of RIA 13 and what the work group is striving to create. The work group will consider each proposal individually to determine if it meets the functional intent of the target. This allows for some element of flexibility with landowners to implement projects and do what we can to protect, hoping to get more later on. This project on the Middle Deschutes is a great example of partnering with landowners to achieve multiple benefits for both salmon and prairie species. In this instance, the initial 100 feet of stream bank adjacent to the river will be planted with native riparian plantings, and then the next 200 feet will be planted in native oak prairie woodland, which will benefit the prairie listed species in that. The most aggressive target the work group set is this one relating to opening streams for fish passage, where they are seeking the elimination of 100% of barriers in the next 10 years. This watershed still has many miles of functional habitat that are inaccessible because of full barriers to passage, where generations of salmon are precluded from spawning and rearing. These projects are obvious, cost-effective ways to restore entire runs of fish. Currently, we know that salmon immediately access existing upstream habitat as soon as passage is restored. Currently, the work group is updating and reprioritizing the barrier inventory for the entire Raya. These two current fish barrier projects, once completed, will open up a combined 3.3 miles of habitat that have been inaccessible to salmon for over 40 years. They also are a great representation of the various landowners that we work with. The one on the top is with the city of Tumwater. They're requesting matching funds from the Brian Abbott Fish Bear Removal Board to replace this culvert at Sap Road. And the picture at the bottom is on a private road owned by about 15 landowners upstream, and is the unfortunate result of an undersized culvert during an atmospheric river event. It didn't all the way, it didn't blow up, but a good chunk of it blew out, and we're trying to fix that. While the work group hasn't yet created implementation targets for barrier, armor removal, this action has been a high priority for many years. Bulkheads limit the flow of sediment on the beach, eliminating spawning areas for forage fish, which are those smaller fish like herring, surf smelt, and sand lance that the adult salmon come down to eat. This project, done in partnership with the Evergreen State College, will eliminate 220 feet of armoring and remove a large concrete pad right on the nearshore environment. By focusing on publicly owned properties, the work group is hoping to demonstrate to private landowners what a natural shoreline or what soft shore armoring can look like, and hopefully inspire additional partnerships into the future. Salmon recovery serves as an economic stimulus for local communities. A study by the Office of Financial Management in 2017 found that for every $1 million invested in salmon recovery, resulted in 2.2 to 2.5 times that in economic activity and up to 33 family wage jobs. Additionally, 80% of the funding awarded stays in the county where the project is located. Combined with matching funds, and given that some projects are leveraged many times more than the grant funding requested through the lead entity process, these local recovery efforts pay dividends, and they have benefits far beyond those solely for salmon recovery. These targets outlined are ambitious, and they won't be achieved with current funding levels. The next step for the work group is to accurately quantify the scale of need by updating the project lists with 2022 cost estimates. This will allow the investment necessary to achieve these targets to be conveyed and sought from a variety of new and existing local, state, and federal resources. Additionally, these targets should be integrated into other local plans, such as linking them with Sustainable Thurston and the jurisdictional capital improvement plans, so that we can fully support one another's efforts. And the outcome of this undertaking will be communicated broadly. And with that, I can take questions.
Thank you, Amy. I am gonna check in with Mark first and see if we have anybody in the room.
Clark Gilman has a question, and I do too, Chair.
Okay. You guys want to Rochambeau for it, or?
No, I defer.
Okay, Clark, why don't you go first, and then Mark, you go next.
Amy, thank you for the presentation. So I heard in the first slide, you described that the inlets of the South Sound are a nursery, while we don't have spawning populations up the river, but then the projects were along the river. So I'm curious what kind of energy and attention has gone. Thurston County reaches, out to the north quite a ways on these points. And so from Oyster Bay to the Nisqually Delta, all this shoreline that's outside of the three cities, what kind of projects or attention is happening there?
Great question. And there's a couple of questions embedded in there. The first one I heard was lots of Chinook in the nearshore, not so much in the freshwater, and yet projects are existing in the freshwater. And the reason for that is that the recovery approach that the lead entity takes is one of multi-species. So while the Chinook salmon at this point are the only listed species, steelhead now are also listed, but they don't, the coho, chum, they don't have a recovery plan, but they're exceptionally important, particularly culturally to the tribes. And the intent is so that the approach that the recovery plan in South Sound that we are taking is one of a multi-species approach trying to prevent additional listings. So while we get a small amount of money, because the money from the state and the federal governments is so focused on delisting an Endangered Species Act listed species in Chinook, we spend a lot of money also on protecting the tribal treaty rights and looking beyond just the restoration of fish, but also ecosystem function restoration, knowing that it's going to benefit a multitude of species and not just adult fish, but also juveniles, and so all the life stages. The other portion of your question, I think, was, what are we doing along those big peninsulas, not just along the stream? And I do have a map that shows all the different projects over the last 20 plus years that have occurred. There has been a ton of work to do wetland restorations, lots of conservation projects on those peninsulas, culvert, so fish passage projects. There's definitely a lot of work outside of the city's jurisdictions. And I think all of the examples, except the one on Percival Creek, I think they're all actually outside of the cities, probably more into the county.
Thank you, Amy.
Yes.
Amy, could you stop sharing your screen just so we can see each other a little better?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, thank you. The question that I have, I'm asking because this is the question I've been asked the most about this work over the past month, and that is with Department of Enterprise Services, therefore the state, releasing that the likely preferred alternative from the Capital Lake Capital Estuary EIS is the return to an estuary. How does that work relate to the work in the rest of the watershed?
I think those two pieces will be in parallel. So as noted, the Capital Lake Estuary, when we started making a list and making our recovery plan back in 2005, was at the top of the list of projects to help restore fish runs. It's also, as a group and as a collective, the members annually go up to the legislature and talk to the legislature about the importance of restoring that estuary and funding the EIS and any other subsequent studies that came down. In terms of how the lead entity directly interacts with the Capital Lake, it's one that we can provide support and technical input on, but it's not something just because of the scale of it is going to be so enormous in terms of funding, we of course can't provide funding specifically to it. I mean, maybe a tiny portion of some element of the project, the lead entity with the allocation could fund, but that work and it will be done in consultation I guess any work that's done like for instance, on the main stem Deschutes or in the tributaries, those are always done in concert. There's always a representative of the lead entity, myself, and sometimes other technical folks and always tribal folks as well that are on those consultation to be sure we have a really robust representation of salmon recovery at the table. So I would say that those processes will be parallel. And I think a lot of excited folks with the outcome.
Thank you. And Chair Helen Wheatley has a question as well.
Yeah, I'm from the Thurston Conservation District. So, my mind is, rushing a million miles an hour on this topic. One of the questions I have directly is what's going on with the recommendation that there be a sort of a Deschutes Advisory Council created? Because one of the things that I've been charged with by the Board of Supervisors of the Conservation District is to try to encourage the TRPC, the folks here, to think about how to better integrate all the elements of the need to preserve and enhance stream quality. We were pretty disturbed by the report that was released last summer on the basin conditions assessment. And the fact that the basins are going downhill. I mean, the finding was that they are not doing well. And we need some robust discussion about how to do that and do it comprehensively. And it seems like an advisory group would be helpful for pulling all the pieces together. But short of that, is there something that are we gonna need to sort of pick up that slack if that's not going forward? And that's just my first, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. That's a great question. There has been some work around the creation of a Deschutes Watershed Council, and a number of years ago, 6 to 8 maybe, the Thurston County had given a little bit of seed money to initiate that process, and so and I actually facilitated it back in the day, and that seed money ran out. Since then, we've been looking for those additional dollars. I think at this point, especially given, as Mark noted, the likely outcome of the environmental impact statement for Capitol Lake, I think that's definitely time for a reconsideration and a rescoping of the conversation. And I think in the past, what folks envisioned is something akin to what the Nisqually River Council has, where you have this really broad group, essentially a watershed council that can advocate more broadly for money that will, that can touch a variety of ecosystem functions beyond just what's, salmon. I think the important thing, again, is that scope. $18 million is what we get for the entire state of Washington to do salmon recovery. So you're right, the basin report shows a downward trend. That downward trend is echoed almost everywhere because the investment is not up to what we know is necessary. It's not even acknowledging the things that we don't even know about yet.
So would it be helpful? Is there some way that we could help with that? Would that help to turn it into a legislative priority or something like that?
Helen, I'm happy to have conversations with you about this.
Okay, and then another question that I had was about the, kind of getting across the silos. Stormwater is a really important part of this. And, since that scientific study a couple of years ago on the role of automobile tires, it's been a real wake-up call. And I know there have been some studies up north of urban streams and the high death rate of salmon just sort of entering into urban areas. I think they found like half the female salmon were dying before they could go upstream just because they entered into urban waters. So how can we think about integrating the stormwater element? Would that be something through transportation or, because I know up in places like King County, they're putting a lot more emphasis on things like bioswales and, or urban stormwater treatment. They're putting a huge emphasis on redoing their urban stormwater systems. So how is there a place for that, for thinking about stormwater?
And you're right. I mean, stormwater, what you're right, we're finding is, nearly 100% lethal for coho in particular. They're very sensitive to storm runoff from the particularly the highways. So stormwater is outside of the habitat purview of the lead entity, but it's definitely something we talk about and try to, we engage with partners, WSDOT locally, we're trying to encourage them. And we've been parties to, sort of experiment where we reintroduce, when we do revegetation, we really amend the soil with compost because we know the microorganisms in the compost helps eat the runoff. We've tried, we're working to try to see if the introduction of mycelium into that compost or even as, filter bags along the way, if we can help with that. We're trying to be really creative. Again, it's that resources piece. And I think the more folks we have around the table, raising that awareness and then the need for the additional resources, I think is going to be really important to get to that point. So I think, we know that, I mean, yeah, stormwater is going to be is the key going forward.
I'd like to add on to that really quickly, because this is an issue that you're going to be hearing a lot more about around this table. And we've talked a little bit about it, but this chemical in tires, PPD, quinone, yeah, there's a number in there, 6 or 8 or something, but
It's six.
okay, thank you. That has been demonstrated now consistently with COHO to be up to 100% lethal with pretty limited exposure. And so right now at the federal level and at the state level, they're working on at National Oceanic Administration, NOAA Fisheries, they're working on what are we going to do about this from a stormwater standard standpoint. And we've been told to start to expect some potential serious delays in how long it takes NOAA Fisheries to review projects for their ESA impacts, Endangered Species Act impacts, because any project with federal money, well, with a federal nexus, money is definitely a federal nexus, requires this, under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, requires consultation with National Marine Fisheries Service, NOAA Fisheries, and or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to determine the impact of that project on these listed species. We've been told that with the uncertainty around this chemical, when you're doing things on roadways and have a stormwater impact, that we could be looking at up to 2-year delays in getting those permitted as they work through these this ESA issue in relation to stormwater. So we are tracking this really closely. So far, there isn't a whole lot more to report than what I just did, but I guarantee you we'll keep talking about this issue around this table, because it will have an impact on transportation projects. It's just a matter of when and how much.
Yeah, there's a ton of interest at all levels. There's been a number of congressional hearings just in the last 2 months that we participated in. It's emerging science for sure. And Mark's right. It's gonna how we deal with that emerging science is gonna affect permits into the future as well. So thank you for doing that, Mark.
Thank you. Those are good questions. Steve, thanks for patiently waiting. You're up.
Just kind of back on the subject of Capitol Lake, whether to keep it as a lake or revert it to an estuary. Has there any, Capitol Lake has not been open since I can remember because of the New Zealand mud snail. What's the plan for the New Zealand mud snail? Now, perhaps reverting it back to an estuary will solve the problem since it's a freshwater snail. But will that actually do it?
Well, hopefully we'll find out. Yeah, I think the hope is that I think the mud snail is most prevalent in where the water is freshest, and less so as it becomes more brackish towards the dam itself. And at at this point, the current science is that the introduction of flushing of that space when it's restored to its natural estuary state will be enough salt water to eliminate the snails.
Plus there's freezing. If you have the tidal action, it freezes the snails.
Yeah. Okay. Mark, are there any other questions in the room? I don't see any online.
No, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amy. Sounds like lots of interest and enthusiasm, and we appreciate the thorough update and report. That brings us to our reports from outside committees. I know Helen has a report from the Puget Sound Regional Council Growth Management Policy Board. Helen, are you ready to go?
Yeah, I guess so. It's been a couple of meetings now, but they both have been on the same theme. And that is that being the Growth Management Policy Board, they are very, very focused on the comprehensive plan reviews. That is the central topic for them right now. because the PSRC is putting together a pretty amazing suite of resources. Because the way that it works for the PSRC members is that they all get sort of, as they work on their comprehensive plans, which might be due a little bit earlier than ours, I think. I'm not sure if there's a year difference.
There's a staggered schedule.
Yeah,
So it's
it's
quite
a-
possible.
Right. So they kind of got onto this like a year ago. They started the process a year ago of reaching out to their various jurisdictions, telling them that they should be aware that the PSRC is going to be rolling out this suite of things, asking them what they need to help them put together their plans, being especially mindful of the places that are not urban. And the way that it works there is that all the comprehensive planning goes, you submit your draft to the PSRC and they kind of do a certification process of the draft to make sure that it's consistent. So, they take their Vision 2050 and they, all the state and federal requirements, and they help the jurisdictions to mash all that together and come up with good plans that are consistent with each other so that they can actually have this kind of regional framework. And they've been putting a lot of emphasis this time around on a lot of the same things that we're thinking about, like equity is a really big one. Open space is a really big one, climate change, all the things, the transportation planning, all the same things that we're concerned with. But the PSRC is really actively trying to put together materials and checklists that everyone can use. And that's great for us, I think, because we can access a lot of that as well. And they're doing work, they're going to be rolling out workshops. There's one that might interest people that's on June, let's see, 23rd, I think it is. Yeah, there's going to be they've started doing workshops on equity, especially racial equity. And there's going to be one on June 23rd on implicit bias. And they're about 90 minutes long. They're kind of rolled into joint board sessions. So people might want to tune into that. But I wanted to point out that, Mark, this is going to be added to the well, my notes are going to be added with some of the links.
Yeah, in the after meeting summary.
The after meeting summary. Yeah, and so I just want to point out what some of those are. There's a really good plan review manual that I think could be very helpful because it's just gets really down into a kind of nitty-gritty checklist of things to think about for your comprehensive plan reviewing. So that's one thing. The Vision 2050 materials are just full of all kinds of useful information, a lot of data that can translate to Thurston County. So I have that. There's a set of specific regional collaboration goals that they've developed, and I have a link for that. And then I especially, again, being from the Conservation District, I wanted to draw attention to the fact that the first kind of comprehensive tool that they've rolled out as part of this process is their toolkit for protecting farms, forests, open space, and rural lands. And I've got a link for that. And it's really comprehensive. It's got a whole list of data tools. It's got policy tools. It's got information about projects that can be done. It's a really, it's about gosh, I don't know, like maybe 70 pages or something. Good stuff. So I really encourage people to look at some of these tools that they're rolling out through PSRC, because I think it's really going to help us to think about our own comprehensive plan process. So that's really impressive. And that's about it. The next the June meeting is going to be about housing. So I'm sure I'll have some good stuff to report out about that. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Helen. We will look forward to seeing those in the meeting summary. And that brings us to, since we did Mark's executive director report earlier, that brings us to member check-in. So in member check-in, it's a chance for you to share anything for the good of other jurisdictions' knowledge, or if there's something that you got from this meeting today that was particularly useful that you're excited to bring back to your jurisdiction. I will share that I'm excited to thank you for bringing up the safety statistics, Clark, because I'm really excited to share out those safety statistics and encouraging students and families to consider taking intercity transit more often. So I will look for hands online, and Mark will look for hands in the room if people have anything they would like to share during member check-in.
Clark has his hand up.
All right, Clark, go ahead.
Great. I just attended a conference together with Paul Brewster from Monday through Thursday. It was the Washington Walkability Institute. And it's a national and Eileen Swarthout came for one of the mornings and checked it out with us. Absolutely. We had a Thurston County team. There was a Grant County team, a Clark County team, and a Lynn Benton Tri-Cities team. And we had national trainers who are convening groups of public health people and planners together to talk about some overlap and common interests around multimodal movability. And a highlight of the event for me was Disability Rights Washington brought down a number of people with different kinds of ways of moving in the world who did movability audits with us. Walking around downtown Olympia, riding the bus, going to the mall, and to have their firsthand feedback as alongside a group of planners and public health officials was, I think, super useful information. And hopefully we'll be able to keep bringing that back to the conversations here. And then I had a request as we considered these issues of runoff from stormwater as we're restoring habitat. I would really appreciate a presentation. WSU has a stormwater center at Puyallup that practices all these things. And then we have a Thurston County-based Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. And if we might bring in guest speakers to give us sort of a broad picture of what the best practices are as you say, there's going to be continued attention and likely funding for that piece of mitigating our impacts on the environment and improving habitat. So I'd be very interested in that.
Thank you, Clark. I'm excited to hear more about the Walkability Institute. So I will reach out to you about that. That sounds really fun and interesting.
And I know we're on Zoom and everything, but Hillary, I thought you would have already had phone calls from people coming out of there saying, here, how can the school district partner? I guess I have to call you after this. All
you
right.
do need to call me. I'm all about the partnering. And I have a list, so we'll talk. But are there any other member check-ins? Anything else people want to share about that's happening in their jurisdictions, or something else they've done, or something they're excited about that they want to bring back to their jurisdictions? Such a quiet group today.
Yeah.
All right, well, I will take this minute to just share my appreciation with the staff who put a lot of time and effort into figuring out how we can transition into this hybrid reality. I think it was a great success, and thank you very much to Berlina and Mark and Vina and everyone else who presented, Amy, those folks who were in person and remote and kind of made it all work. We really appreciate you, and we'll just go boldly into this new reality. And I thoroughly hoped that I will be able to attend in person next time. And if there's nothing else, I think we are adjourned.
Non-debatable motion.
Thank you.